Greetings. I'm Mike Lewis from wherepeteris.com, and I'm joined here by one of our other contributors, David Lafferty. And David is planning on launching a new, he's spearheading a new project for us called The Critical Catholic. We plan for it to be a program on Sunday evenings, a live stream to be found on our website, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. David, why don't you tell us a little bit about what concept you had, or what is, I guess, what are the thoughts behind The Critical Catholic?
Sure. Well, this is a show born out of the idea that there's a crisis in Catholicism that we're facing, and that's only getting worse. And it's marked by a lack of critical thinking and really a disrespect for what I would call the actual truth or the empirical truth. So this is the truth of objective reality as close as we can get to it. And I think we have a duty as Catholics to cleave as closely as possible to the objective truth, even as we are defending the truths of the faith. So there's these two types of truths. There's the truths of the faith that we have to defend. And then there's also objective reality, which we have to recognize as best we can. And sometimes there are clashes here. Sometimes it becomes convenient to ignore certain realities, or to, in some cases, fabricate or misrepresent reality in order to further some kind of goal related to the faith. And that's what we need to fight against. And I think that this, I mean, you can call it a post-truth Catholicism. It's as much of a threat, I think, as modernism ever was back in the early 20th century. And it's sometimes very difficult to recognize because it tends to hide under the cover of an external piety or religiosity. And to question it means that you are somehow questioning the faith, and that's not the case. So this show will hopefully provide a forum through which we can all receive a healthy dose of critical thinking so that we can better navigate the world of Catholic media and culture, as well as the media world at large. So a lot of this is going to focus on the conspiracy theories that have become so prevalent in social media, and unfortunately, even in the Catholic world, the heavy media bias and media misrepresentation that we sometimes see. And in some cases, the embrace of lies and misrepresentations to further Catholic causes. So in doing this, though, we're going to draw upon the teaching of the Church and the wisdom of Pope Francis, because I think Pope Francis is very careful in how he speaks. He sees things, I think, very, very clearly, and is not prone to exaggeration or mythologizing and that sort of thing. And so we have to use these tools in order to develop a healthy skepticism towards a lot of the kinds of wild stories and claims that are all too common on social media and Catholic media. So, we invite anyone who's interested in where Peter is, or even people who aren't, just to come and listen to our conversation, see what you think. And we're going to be doing a sort of roundup of items that are floating around the world of Catholic media, maybe some of the theories, conspiracy theories that are flying around, misrepresentations. Try to, contextualize, or in some cases debunk them as best we can. And then in some cases, we'll delve a little deeper into, again, deeper issues relating to this idea of post-truth Catholicism and how we have to cleave to the empirical truth, the actual truth, even as we defend the truths of the Catholic faith.
the Catholic Church has always argued, or has argued for at least the last millennium, that our faith is reasonable and it's based in reality. It doesn't contradict science. And what I think we've been seeing is sort of a denial of either scientific expertise or scientific truth, or embrace of implausible theories or apocalyptic thinking that typically in the past has always existed, maybe on the Catholic fringes, but has been, at least in this continent, more closely associated with fundamentalist Protestantism.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that enter Catholicism in a really powerful way, and of course it's not just Catholics that get involved in this. Like you said, it can enter into fundamentalist Protestantism, Mormonism. It can enter into a lot of different types of religious thinking, one of the things that I've always felt about Catholicism and about Catholics is that in Catholicism there's a very strong adherence to the truth. There's a real prohibition on lying, or at least there should be, and this is something that we are called upon to always avoid. Avoid misrepresentations, avoid lying whenever we can. These are potentially grave sins. So even if it's inconvenient for us, we sometimes have to acknowledge the truth, even if it doesn't maybe fit with our conception of how the world should be, or with the goals that we're trying to achieve. One thing that I think is very characteristic of this way of thinking is that it's a mythical way of thinking. So you leave behind, the world of observation and kind of everyday contact with ordinary people, and you start thinking mythologically or mythically about the world. And you see it in like apocalyptic type thinking, where there's always this sort of, imminent second coming, or some kind of imminent catastrophe. Again, these things are sometimes legitimate parts of Catholic thinking, but when they take on a mythical role, a very immediate mythical role, they can twist reality. They can help us, they can cause us to lose touch with everyday empirical reality. I think we see it, most evidently in someone like Archbishop Vigano, who has become, I think, emblematic of this descent into a post-truth Catholicism. He seems to be, in his more recent letters, thinking at an almost entirely mythical level.
Instead of humans, instead of people with feelings and with free will, they seem to believe that we're people are archetypes. Pope Francis is an archetype of evil. He's this mythological, whether they think he's the false prophet or the Antichrist or someone who's going to usher in the Antichrist. They see him as playing this, like you said, this mythical role. And you almost, the way that they seem to, it kind of plays into their worldview of history as well. They, when they think that a pope should be doing this and this and this, they ignore that prior popes were people. Pius X, Leo XIII were people with feelings who faced tough decisions, who made decisions that could have been right or wrong. They have this idea that priests all did, acted a certain way and believed a certain way, and that people were all lockstep with the Pope, or whenever there was a heretic, they would be shot down by the Pope or by the good priests and by the bishops. They seem to think that the failure in catechesis is something new in our society, for example, and you look at the majority of church history, and throughout most of the time, probably the majority of Christians were illiterate. So you want to think about how good their Catholic education may have been.
Yeah, because when you take a look at actual history and you really get down into the weeds of it, it's always messy. It's always so much messier than the retrospective sort of mythologizing of history is. And yeah, with people like Vigano, you get this incredibly mythological view of the world. And like you said, he now sees his reality all the time in through some kind of mythical lens, right? Where Pope Francis is, he's a symbol. He's not an actual person. He's a symbol of everything that Vigano despises. Pope Francis is a Freemason. He's ushering in the Antichrist. He's, all of these things. And he just attaches them to Pope Francis in the way that you do with symbols. And that's how symbols work. That's how myths work. And one of the things that this is something that has appeared in Catholic history before. It appeared at the time of the Action Française in France, the movement that was led by Charles Maurras, who was himself agnostic, but who was a fanatical Catholic in other respects, because it was politically useful, because it created a certain myth that fit with his idea of an integral nationalism for France. Like, it was just France is Catholic, so we have to be fanatical Catholics. And
you see that today with people like Steve Bannon and Matteo Salvini, multiple marriages, kids from wherever, and but then you have church militant. I mean, I remember calling them out on this headline that Pope Francis didn't meet with Salvini, and they said something to the effect of, Pope Francis won't meet with faithful Catholic Italian politician. And it's like, he's for legalized abortion. He's for gay marriage. He was married before, and I believe he's living with someone else and has, I mean, not that I want to get into the details of his life, but it's like, his lifestyle doesn't align with faithful Catholic, and here they are picking on various Catholics of different stripes and saying that they aren't authentically Catholic, and they're labeling this guy a faithful Catholic. Steve Bannon married 3 times. Yeah. All
someone like Salvini has to do is hold up a rosary, and
exactly,
and that triggers the sort of response that he's looking for. And because people, again, they're thinking symbolically, right? They're saying the rosary, it's a symbol, he's holding it. Now that means he's a faithful Catholic,
except when Biden holds the rosary, that means he's a hypocrite.
Now, I got to admit, though, there may be some mythologizing that goes on with Biden as well.
Oh, I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
I think Biden is trying to appeal to a cultural Catholicism that isn't super tuned into the various doctrinal issues. It's just sort of like people who grow up in a Catholic culture and like the idea of Catholicism but aren't particularly well catechized, but they see Biden holding that rosary and they feel a kinship with him. And I mean, I don't know whether it's authentic for him or not, but it's certainly giving off this image of, and notice they say holding the rosary. It's never praying the rosary in either case. But
you get the rosary used as a prop quite a lot. And you have to watch out for it with politicians of all kinds, because that's part of what politics is about, is creating a narrative, creating a myth that people can believe in. And certainly I think it's legitimate to criticize Biden in that respect, or at least to question whether he's, perhaps manipulating Catholic opinion, in the same way that someone like Salvini does. At the same time, I don't think there's anyone who's achieved a sort of mythical status of the level of Donald Trump, because he became a sort of avatar that you could, attach any kind of identity to, and he could become, for Catholics, he became, like the one hope for Catholicism. For Mormons, he became the one hope for Mormonism. For evangelicals, he was their guy, and so he fit into this sort of a mythological system that a lot of people were constructing, including, in the fringes, although it actually entered the mainstream after a while, the QAnon conspiracy theory, where he became really the savior, the person who was going to, bring the storm, free the children from, the grip of the evil cabal, and bring about a new world, essentially. So I've never seen that kind of thing before in an American politician in my lifetime. Yeah, that's the sort of thinking that we need to be very careful of, especially because, when you start thinking that way, the key with mythical thinking is it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. It doesn't matter. It may be true, like the things that you're sort of mythologizing, the things that you believe in, they may be true, maybe not. That is irrelevant. What matters is whether it motivates people, whether it produces the kind of behavior in people that it's supposed to, right? So there was a French philosopher who had an influence on some Catholic thinkers actually around the time of the Action Française, named Georges Sorel. And he came up with this idea of myth. And he looked at the early Christians and he thought, oh, these people are so great. They think that, the end of the world is coming any moment, right? Like that Jesus is going to be, returning any day. And so that changed them. It made them, sort of anticipate, always living in anticipation of a sort of imminent apocalyptic moment. And he transferred that into the realm of politics. He was a socialist, and he said that, we need to create this myth of the general strike where, capitalist society will, be completely shattered because everything will come to a great halt, and there'll be a socialist revolution. And he said, it doesn't matter if it never happens. What matters is you have to keep people thinking, that it's going to happen. It's going to happen any minute. And because that changes people, it turns them into kind of like soldiers waiting, preparing for what's going to happen. And you see that in the QAnon conspiracy theory. The idea was the storm was always just around the corner. Any minute now, all the arrests are going to happen. Everything's going to, kick in, and all the sealed indictments are going to be opened, and everyone's going to get arrested. And over and over again, it didn't materialize.
And I wonder what one thing that fascinates me, and hopefully maybe we'll be able to get either a psychologist or some kind of sociologist who can kind of dig into what the mentality is. I mean, one thing that the thing is, having grown up on I would say a low dose of conspiracy theories growing up. I thought that there were probably some, growing up, I was told there were some Freemasons in the Vatican, and, that there were the Federal Reserve and, the American founding, like there was a lot of Freemasonry behind that. And I mean, obviously the Freemasons and the church have a long and complicated history, and there are different kinds of Freemasons and different kinds of Catholics. So and some of it may have been more justified than others. But I suppose when I started to emerge from that conspiracy theory type thinking, my assumption was that other people had worked through that process and or had never fallen for the conspiracy theories before. And then what I found after Pope Francis got elected and after Donald Trump got elected was that people who I assumed were not the type of people to fall into this kind of thing were going in head first, hook, line, and sinker, and just buying these narratives and even getting apocalyptic. I mean, we could talk about public figures or famous Catholics who have really gone down the rabbit hole. I'm thinking various Catholic university professors, I think about, Janet Smith. I never really thought of her as a conspiracy theorist. Taylor Marshall had a complete flip, from being just a kind of a semi-normal conservative Catholic that leaned a little, liturgically traditional, to now full-blown vegano apologist. Cardinal Burke, I don't know what kind of conspiracy theorist he was before, but to be talking about microchips and vaccines and one world government, one world religion, and thinking that the Amazon Synod was pantheism, and things that are so easily debunkable, yet are readily embraced by certain people. And I guess the thing is, I just didn't foresee it happening, because I had assumed that people, sort of like, with the Obama birth certificate conspiracy theory, or the 9/11 conspiracy theory, or even you take the moon landing conspiracy theory, and you have people who are just, they're people who are into that. They're conspiracy theorists. And then you have the vast majority of the population who is like, oh, that's silly. And I thought that was what would happen. And maybe I'm imagining things, but I feel like so many more ordinary people have fallen into these, whether it's QAnon or whether it's Pope Francis conspiracy theories, apocalyptic conspiracy theories. I just didn't anticipate it happening. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I mean, and I have some, theories as to why this is happening. And sometimes I feel that we've been too tolerant of it, because, like maybe you get a certain figure in the church who's, talking about, all these unapproved apparitions and things, and it gains a significant following. And, maybe it's a following of, very pious people who found something, very profound in this person. Now, so you might say, well, is it that harmful if, maybe this person is full of it, but is it that harmful if, as long as he's getting people to pray their rosary, or he's getting people to, really take their faith seriously? Well, actually, it is. It is a problem. You can't do that. That's something that you can't. You can't lie in order to further the faith, or to spread the faith. That's not how evangelization should work, and that's not how the church should work.
And that's one thing that I have noticed. Like, I know. Like Taylor Marshall is pushing the daily rosary. Now he's saying you're not a real Catholic if you don't pray a daily rosary. I know that I've dealt with, various commenters or people who have pushed back against, I wrote an essay sort of criticizing Bishop Strickland of Tyler, Texas, because he has been promoting conspiracy theories and anti-vaccination conspiracy theories, and has been ignoring COVID safety protocols and that sort of thing. And he's presenting a real physical danger. And I remember one of the commenters is like, I live in this diocese, and let me tell you, more people are praying the rosary because of him, and going to adoration, and going to confession, and going to daily mass. And I mean, I think maybe for the average Catholic, those are all good things. And I think for the average Catholic who doesn't quite understand the ecclesiology of the church, maybe doesn't have and we don't really need to, there's a reason why we have a hierarchy and a magisterium. It's because it's there so that we can pursue our own personal holiness. Some of us are nerds and we're into that kind of stuff. And, thank God for that too. But others are, if you're a hardworking dad, blue collar job, you just want to provide for your family. You want to raise your kids well. You want to, contribute to your community and to your parish. these devotions are good. They can all be good. But then attaching on this hatred of the Pope, these conspiracy theories, these ideas that the world is going to end, looking at your bishop, who is clearly in opposition to the Pope, and I mean, this is the real dilemma. That's why I think Strickland is, to use a term that I've used recently, I think he's uniquely dangerous, because there actually are souls entrusted to his care. Even though it's a tiny diocese, it is a geographic place where he is the authority, and the only authority above him is the Pope.
That's something that has stood out to me for this last year, how it's incredibly appalling that there are people within the church, like Bishop Strickland, who are willing to use the pandemic and willing to put people at risk, serious risk, when it comes to vaccines as well, for the sake of, expressing a certain religiosity and, like you said, maybe getting more people to show up for church temporarily. But these are going to be short-term gains. Long-term, people eventually see through this stuff, and people see the damage that's done.
There's a formal long-term schism.
Or there can be a schism. I mean, people, probably said, the same thing about, someone like, I'm not comparing Strickland to him, but just on the same theme, with Father Maciel of Legionaries of Christ. I'm sure there are people who thought that he was a fraud, but look at all the good he's doing. Look at all the money he's bringing in. Look at all the institutions that he's founded, the vocations. You can't, it's very difficult to stand up to something like that. And
then you find out that the depth of the evil behind it is worse than anything you could have imagined.
Yeah. And then the long-term damage of that is just unbelievable. So that's what we have to avoid. So sometimes this means, resisting things that seem very appealing. Like a lot of these sort of myths can be very appealing to believe in, because they give you, a sense of excitement, a sense of, that your faith really, really matters. But it's kind of like, there's been a big controversy about this with the conspiracy theories surrounding child trafficking and human trafficking that you get with QAnon. And there's other organizations that have kind of sprung up that are like these soft QAnon organizations that sort of pretend to be about saving the children, but really it's more just a kind of exaggeration of reality, and they don't actually do anything. And some people would say, well, at least things like QAnon or these like Save the Children type organizations are getting people to pay attention to the problem of child trafficking. So that's a good thing. But no, it's we see that these conspiracy theories can do incredible damage to people who are genuinely trying to fight very complex problems like child trafficking or human trafficking, child labor, those kind of things. These are very, very difficult problems to solve. And when you get, sort of conspiracy theorists barging in there, telling lies all over the place, thinking in a sort of mythological way, it actually, frustrates people's efforts, and it can end up harming people. So that's what we have to watch out for.
It's a multifaceted problem. It's something that's happened in the world that's also affecting our church. Like, to me, I don't doubt to some degree the sincerity of someone like Joseph Strickland. I mean, there are certain things that are clear. People will point out contradictions. People will point out that he is openly dissenting from the magisterium. By any definition, that CDF document that came out that said that the vaccines were illicit, it was an official document. It was approved and ordered for publication by the Pope. That's if you look at what qualifies as magisterial. That is like that's the exact criteria for something to participate in the ordinary magisterium. And for people to just dismiss that so willy-nilly, I guess that's one of the things. Like, I know that, and this is kind of getting into a little bit of a different avenue, but I think for a long time there was an emphasis, maybe it was post-Enlightenment or post-Reformation. There was this whole idea that, no, you Catholics, you follow the church, you follow the Pope blindly. You don't think, you get told, what you're supposed to believe. Whereas the sola scriptura Protestant is having some personal revelation. Enlightenment thinkers think that they're coming up with all of these ideas on their own. And there was sort of this post-Trent theological, maybe the neo-Thomistic pushback was like, no, the Catholic Church is perfectly rational, perfectly reasonable, perfectly logical. They built these systems that in many ways were predictive, I guess you could say, of this. Like, we believe this because this is connected with this, which is connected with this. I mean, a lot of it is theoretical, a lot of it is symbolic, which Pope Francis is very much like, let's look at the actual issue here. Let's look at the actual, like, what's the situation? What are all the factors? We can't just apply a blanket thing. But I think Catholics for so long were built into this mindset of, I can determine on my own what the Catholic Church teaches because I know these theological principles. And they became maybe a little bit too self-reliant. And because like it or not, we do have authority above us to tell us what the Catholic Church teaches. It's not just up to the theologians. The theologians, there's speculative theology, there's systematic theology. There are different areas of theology that either get maybe put to the side or de-emphasized. And then there are other things that are developed, but not in a purely linear fashion, where there's actually it could be a change in direction. I mean, the obvious example is the Immaculate Conception, because there was this, for centuries, you had the Dominicans versus the Franciscans. The Dominicans didn't believe the Immaculate Conception was possible. The Franciscans did. They would condemn each other as heretics. And then in 1854, Pope Pius IX declares ex cathedra de fide, this is dogma. And the story goes, the Dominican churches rang their bells as soon as they heard the news because they were accepting this authority. But based on their logic, based on their Thomism, if it was purely up to them, the dogma would have gone in the other direction. And I mean, the fact of the matter is, we have that authority for a reason. And, I almost want to say that that if I was to look at things allegorically and mythologically and symbolically, I want to say that the timing of the First Vatican Council was providential. Mm-hmm. Because the timing of it, first it preceded the modernist crisis, which was pushing aside papal authority. It preceded the age of mid 20th century pop theology, Hans Kung, the various types of theologians who were brilliant men who were coming up with their own systems and their own theories, but ultimately they were reined in by that central authority. And now we're looking at a time, and then Lefebvre followed those guys. And now we're looking at what I think is Lefebvre on steroids. It's like, or Lefebvre and Plinio Correa from TFP, like merged and then made to go viral on the internet is basically what we're looking at now. And I think if we hadn't had that council 150 years ago, we'd still be looking at medieval canonists who theorized that the Pope could become heretic, and it would have split the church apart big time. I think
in the 19th century too, you had the development of new communications technology that really democratized, democratized opinion. So, I mean, you had like daily newspapers all over the place. I mean, Europe was just completely filled with newspapers, and actually the media blitz that surrounded the First Vatican Council was just incredibly intense. And so I think that, it's easy maybe to see Vatican I as a reaction to that realizing that, you're going to have a lot of people with very strong opinions about what the church teaches. And people are going to be overwhelmed by this, new world of media. You also have people who are much more literate, much more educated in general. And so you get this gradual democratization of, education and knowledge of the church. So you need this sort of central authority, an authority that can make final decisions when it comes to, certain debates and that sort of thing. So I think, we're seeing that today too, that you have, I mean, a lot of the, some of the people you see on social media who have opinions, they sometimes talk and act like they're little popes, right? Like sometimes the language they use is so incredibly pompous because it's, it's almost imitating the sort of the language of a older style language of the encyclical, right? And that can be, very dangerous if you have.
Are we both thinking of the same person?
Well, we probably, there's a few, that I think fall into that category. So that's, you have to watch out with that. There's a lot of people who will tell you what the church teaches, and they'll say it with all frankness and honesty. And even, we're realizing, it took me some time to realize this, but, organizations like EWTN or Catholic Answers, what they provide is not necessarily what the church teaches, right? Even though they claim to be doing that a lot of the time. So you have to be, we have to, I think we're all looking to the Pope as a kind of final arbiter, someone who can, offer authoritative opinions, but that's also generating a lot of resentment because there's a lot of people who think, who's the Pope to tell me what the church teaches, or some people who criticize the Pope for not being rigorous enough or not being, knowledgeable enough about church, about theology or about, church teachings and things like that, which is just, the most incredibly, pompous thing to say.
Yeah. I mean, the one where they go, well, we had a run of such good popes, we couldn't expect it to go on forever. And it's just, but you talk to people like Sam Rocha, or you talk to people like Rodrigo Guerra, people with doctorates in philosophy, and Massimo Borghese, who, a great political philosopher in Italy who wrote The Mind of Pope Francis.
Yes.
And these intellectuals, they know who he's referring to, and they know his sources and they know who he's relied on. There was that academic paper that I haven't read, that the previously unpublished, and it was about reality. It was like his philosophy of reality or something. It was over my head, or I'd need to.
I know the one you're talking about. A very, very abstract.
I'd need to get another 3 straight nights of 9 hours of sleep, and then have a really good breakfast and sit there with it in a perfectly silent room.
And Massimo Borghese gets deep into the weeds with that stuff. It's so incredibly fascinating because you realize, Pope Francis, he does have this really profound depth to his thinking. It's just not the same frame of reference that popes in the past have, most of them have had.
Yeah.
So he's coming from different angles sometimes, and you got to take the time to try to figure out where he's coming from.
Yeah. I mean, he's more than I think more people give him credit for.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think, I mean, there's the Guardini connection between the two of them. I mean, they're both rooted in his thought to a large degree, but some of the things that he talks about when he goes into ideology versus faith versus ideology, evangelization is through attraction, not through coercion. And then there's the proselytism versus evangelization.
Yeah.
These are all things that I really picked up strongly from Pope Benedict. And when people like Francis's earliest critics would pick up on that kind of statement, and they would say that this isn't Catholic or this is heretical. And I'm just like, all I'd have to do is go to the Benedict quote and find the exact same statement, except Francis is a little bit more brash, I'd say. He's making the same basic point, but he's being a little bit more daring.
He's a little maybe less elegant in his language.
Yeah.
I mean, Pope Benedict was an academic, a really brilliant field.
Well, and with Benedict, it was written down. I think that was part of it too. Yes. I think Francis likes to go off script, and I've heard, I haven't known enough Argentines in my life to totally vouch for this, but sort of their reputation is for blurting things out and then thinking about it a couple days later, maybe. But saying what's on their mind or coming up with an analogy that's maybe not the most, and it's something I personally love, because that's like, I've gotten yelled at by teachers and peers for blurting stuff out on, my entire life. So my parents. So it's sort of like, okay, I can kind of dig this. It's like the rabbits line where it's like, it's not our teaching on contraception. That doesn't mean you have to breed like rabbits. It just means you have to. And like, to me, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I get that. And then when I found out people were insulted, I was like, well, he said you're not supposed to be like a rabbit. He didn't call you a rabbit,
and some people take those statements and take them too literally.
But and that's the other thing that people say is when they say he should be more careful about what he says. But just like you were saying, with the dawn of the newspapers in the 19th century, we're in a situation where, for all we know, Benedict the 15th in the in the 1910s, 1920s, he could have been wisecracking all day long, writing slop, and then they tidy it all up. I know that the homily, I was just reading about John Paul I, and I believe maybe the homily he gave at his installation mass, he was so John Paul II was the first pope officially to switch from the regnal we, instead of using the word I, but he wasn't really the first one to do it. And I have to recheck the details, but I believe John Paul I, when he gave that homily, he delivered it with the I's and the me's instead of the we's and the us's. And the official transcript has the plural, has the regnal we. But so it's like one of those things where, with John Paul I, he wasn't in good health. He was only pope for a month. But some of these things were already kind of going on in his head that were things weren't going to be as informal. Well, I mean, it's terrible. They call him, his nickname was the Smiling Pope.
Yes.
Which is, I'd like to think other popes smiled, but of course, when you're a portrait painter or when you're, you've got one of those cameras where you got to sit still for 25 minutes, you want the Pope to look as fancy as possible, as serene and serious and intellectual and important as possible. And it's just, there've got to have been a few popes along the way that were, not as that are known as very good popes, but might have been a little bit more irreverent in their personal life. And it's just all that we've received are these formal documents. So we don't really know.
And we create, a particular image of these popes in retrospect. And like you said, it's sometimes very distorted. People forget about a lot of the things that Pope Benedict taught that are very much in line with Pope Francis, or especially Pope Francis's connection to John Paul II, especially when it comes to things like interreligious dialogue. People forget that even though John Paul II was, doctrinally very rigorous, he was also a huge proponent of interreligious dialogue. And, like Pope Francis has said, he sometimes, risked heresy for the sake of, facilitating a dialogue.
I think he went further than Francis. I think he went further than Francis.
He went further, yeah. I think he
in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And if the internet had existed back then,
he would have been, torn apart he was in the, in the little
in these little pockets. I mean, apparently at Assisi 1986, the Lefebvres showed up and they were handing out pamphlets or flyers or something about how heretical that interfaith meeting was.
Yeah.
And I mean, there you had Triumph magazine, you had The Wanderer, you had The Remnant, you had various zines or Lefebvre's publications. Like these were groups that existed in these pockets. But unlike today, these were people who had skin in the game.
Yeah.
Like they stopped going to the regular church. In a lot of cases, they picked up and moved to Spokane or to Oyster Bay, New York, or to Cincinnati or to St. Mary's in Kansas, to where these communities actually are, and gave their whole lives to this the extremist lifestyle. I mean, we both read Waiting for the Apocalypse by Veronica Chater, and her dad moves the entire family to Portugal. Yeah, and so it's like these are people who really, like, I mean, not to say it was good, but I mean, these aren't people who could just rattle off at the keyboard and go to their local FSSP parish. These were people who were sneaking around with rogue independent priests, going to mass in furniture stores before they had opened on Sunday morning and things like that. And today it's just become really easy to be radicalized.
It has. And I think, this is something that I think we'll explore a lot, maybe when we're doing the show and we're talking about these things, is how I really think the internet opened a sort of Pandora's box, right? Like it created the culture of anonymity, first of all, that allowed people to say things that they would never say in their regular lives, where they had to face consequences for their actions, right? So it emboldened a lot of people. It also allowed the circulation of ideas and theories, and some of them, recycled from a long time ago, that were allowed to kind of flourish. You can pretend to be anything you want on the internet. You can LARP in so many, live action role play in so many different ways. And so it created this, again, a sort of mythological way of living where you create your own reality. And that's emboldened people in many ways. And unfortunately, it's left the internet message boards and places like that behind, and now it's really entered into, I think, Catholic media. Of course, not just Catholic, but media in many respects, but Catholic included. And
when your pastor or your bishop is on board with this kind of mentality, that's when it gets into the real world.
Yeah, and you're seeing it. It's into people's parishes. It's there's people within the institutional church who are repeating this, and some people. It's so easy to slip into it, and I think we need to do a massive reality check and bring people back to, help bring people back to some kind of semblance of normality and adherence to, empirical reality. And I should say too that, like, even though we're doing this, on behalf of the church, like in order to, protect the church and to, help it avoid being, damaged by this kind of thinking. I do think it's okay to criticize the church. Like, I mean, there's a certain way you can approach it, though, right? Like, there's a
it's what's essential and what is prudential, I think, is the and I mean, that's one of the things that I've always said about the website is, people say, you don't understand, there are different levels to the magisterium. And I say, I do very much understand that. We at Where Peter Is, we happen to be fans of Pope Francis. And if you say, I didn't like this encyclical because it stunk, which I think you're fair to say, like, I just didn't like it. I'm still going to argue with you that it was and tell you that it's the greatest thing that's ever been written by any Pope ever, because I'm a super fan. Like, that's okay too. I look at Larry Chapp. The man can't stand Pope Francis, but I respect him because he has a proper sense of ecclesiology. He knows that Pope Francis is not a heretic. He just doesn't like him. Which I respect. I respect him for holding that opinion, even though I think he's dead wrong about the Pope. My problem is when you have somebody like Cardinal Burke, who is saying that the teaching on the death penalty is just the Pope's personal opinion as a man and has no authority over anyone. Or when he's listed 5 documents that are magisterial by any stretch of the imagination and said that they are not part of the magisterium, which he has said, which I have documented on the site. People don't seem to realize that. They call it a hit piece. And really it was, I was just saying, he said this, and this. Here are the links. Here are the transcripts. Here are the audio recordings. What's to be made of that? But no one wants to engage with those actual thoughts. But it's when you cross that line that it gets really dangerous. Like somebody like Larry Chapp, we can argue over whether or not his policy in China was the wisest thing to do, or whether or not, he thought that the Vatican Gardens ceremony, he thought it was stupid. He didn't think it was pagan worship. He thought it was just silliness and it wasn't reverent enough, like that kind of thing, which, okay, so let's talk about what it was, but at least we're on that same level. Whereas somebody's saying it's a demon or they're worshiping a demon, they're on a completely different, they've made a category error.
Yeah. And you get people like, you have Burke, you have Vigano, you have Schneider, sometimes Cardinal Mueller's as well. They're basically acting like mini popes, right?
Yeah.
Like they issue their own statements, their own documents,
manifestos.
Manifestos in often incredibly pompous language. So they're really pontificating, in the truest sense, and they and people listen to them like they are the real authorities in the church, and that's, to me, is very dangerous. So if you had someone, like, say, when it comes to the death penalty, if you have someone who says, I don't understand this idea of making the death penalty inadmissible, it just doesn't gel with how I understand. So they're having trouble with it. They're having trouble. They have a criticism of it.
And I'm not blaming them for this, but they always bring up the exact same talking points.
They do. It's always.
What does inadmissible mean? It's not in. How can you have something that was okay for the first however many years and now it's bad? Is it intrinsic evil or not? Like, it's like they're getting these talking points from people who they think know what they're talking about.
Yeah.
But they don't.
Yeah.
or they're being very subversive. They're parroting. They've learned to trust certain people. They're parroting the talking points of those people. And those people have misled them terribly.
Yes.
And I don't know how to get out of that other than to show them what the church teaches about papal authority, because they think they're following church authority. They're not.
Yeah.
And then trying to illustrate the continuity, the development in continuity, which one can articulate, but when they're stuck on the talking points, it's like they're not even thinking about, they're not doing the critical thinking.
Yes, exactly. And that if you are feeding, or you're being fed talking points that you're finding on the internet, on whoever's blog, right? That's not a healthy way to approach the faith. I think it's you have to take a very broad-minded view. And again, I think there are forms of criticism that are valid as long as they have that sort of broad-minded view, that critical approach where you're willing to accept that you may be wrong, right? Like that you may be, that's a huge thing. We have to be willing to, even when we have trouble with the church, or we're questioning a particular teaching, that we have to say, well, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I have to, critique my own thinking here. And that's a part of the process of, I think, church teaching sort of being received in the population. It takes time sometimes.
Oh, and that's one of the things I think that I've been sort of challenged on. Like there are a couple of pieces, biblical writing in particular, the series that, like that Adam Rasmussen has done, and he's talked a little bit about, he talked about, to some degree, the historicity of the Bible and whether or not, and his language was a little bit looser than I would have used, concerning can there be errors in the Bible. And I wouldn't have used the term error because it's associated with doctrinal error, but some things may have not been, it's not that God didn't intend those things to be, like, basically Adam held very firm to everything that's in the Bible is what God intended to be in the Bible, nothing more, nothing less. It's all inspired, yet, and these are perfectly legitimate, especially since Vatican II, especially since Pius XII, forms of criticism, not textual criticism. When we use the word criticism, we're not meaning like being negative towards it. It's analyzing it critically. But they're just certain dates, factual things that don't exactly line up. And so anyway, we were accused of being heretical for running something that was heretical. And there's a commenter who keeps bringing up one particular article. And here's the thing: I don't think it was heretical. And I had a few theologians read it over, but here, now Adam and I are under the same bishop, we're both under Cardinal Gregory. If our bishop ordered me to take it down or change it or alter it, if the CDF said it was an error, and granted, or if there was a document that was released by the CDF that addressed some of the things that Adam posted head on, which I don't think is going to happen, but in theory, I wouldn't hesitate to take it down, or change it or whatever. Like if there was concrete authority from magisterial, a statement from magisterial authority, speculative theology is a thing. Let's make a proposal. If the authority says no, the Pope shoots it down. Just like Cardinal Casper at the Synod on the Family, he put forth a proposal for, with the Pope's permission, and that was sort of setting the debate or setting the discussion for the Synod on the Family. I personally thought that where he shot, he overshot the mark, he overshot the line of what was doctrinally possible. And I think Amoris Laetitia did not go as far as Cardinal Casper's proposal did. The funny thing is, Cardinal Casper's proposal is milder than Joseph Ratzinger Father Joseph Ratzinger's 1972 proposal.
Yes,
but that's neither here nor there. But I think that it's good to have, like, okay, let's explore what's possible. Let's trust the church to keep the faith. Let's have this discussion. Let's put these things out on the table, and let's see where the Holy Spirit guides us, because we believe in divine assistance of the Holy Spirit, the Pope being the guarantor of orthodoxy. And there's no danger in discussing something, especially with the guidance of the Pope. Now, people talk about Germany, and maybe they're not listening to the Pope, and maybe they're not going about it the right way. But when you're with and under Peter in the synodal process, there shouldn't be anything to fear.
Yeah, and I think, Pope Francis has really made a point of opening things up in the church to allow for a certain kind of criticism in a certain context, right? So he's certainly, with the synodal church that he's trying to encourage, the idea is, that there's really nothing's really off the table. Like, he's willing to talk about things. Now, it doesn't mean that he's willing to accept everything. Like, he was perfectly willing at the Amazon Synod to, talk about married priests and things like that, right? I mean, he's perfectly willing to have people come and make those kind of proposals and call for that kind of change. Doesn't mean he's going to go for it, but he's willing to have people speak and
make the case for it.
The case for it. And he, even with, like the whole, women deacons issue and stuff, he's shown at least an openness to explore the issue. It doesn't mean he's going to, go for it. So, and to me, that's very promising, because it does, I love the idea of a synodal church where nothing's off the table. We can talk about things. We don't need to hide our
desires
and criticisms and all these things, because there can be a problem too when we hide things. Like let's say with the idea of the family, right? So the church sometimes has a very, and Pope Francis, has acknowledged that, sometimes a very idealistic view of the family. And in reality, people, there's a lot of, it's very messy. The family is a very messy thing. And I think, the Synod on the Family acknowledged that, and Morris Laetitia acknowledges that. So we need to be able to kind of talk about those things and say, I find it difficult to live up to what the church teaches within the family, or I find this difficult, that difficult, and talk about it. But in a way that's respectful, where you're all coming together and discerning together and thinking together, but under the Pope as well. And that's the real key. So where you get people breaking off from the church, like a person like a sort of like Hans Kung or someone like that, that can be an issue, because then you have someone kind of going rogue. And
that's what we have now. I mean, it's just on the other side, except it's Hans Kung wasn't pretending to stand for what the church really stands for. He was pushing to change the church, change the church back to what he thought it should be. But anyway, it's been great talking to you, David. I think we can wrap this up. But so
when we get talking, we just kind of go.
We do. So the Critical Catholic.
Yes.
With David Lafferty.
Yeah.
Sunday evenings.
Yeah.
8 Eastern, 9 Eastern. What do you think?
8 Eastern.
8 Eastern.
Yeah. 8 Eastern. We'll do a roundup of the news stories that have been, flying around, and then we'll get into a little bit of discussion. So it'll be 1 hour. It'll be, informative, but not too long.
Yeah. And David will be there, and I'll probably be there, but it's like we might have some guests. We'd like to talk to Catherine Joyce one of these days, who wrote that wonderful, I don't know if wonderful is the right word, comprehensive Vanity Fair story about the QAnon Catholic phenomenon. And I know that there are a lot of other people that would be good to talk to about this as well. So anyway, great talking to you. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Until next time, God bless. Take care. Bye, David. Have a nice evening. Give my best to the family.
Yes.
All right. Have a good one.